Welcome to Eclectic Images and Crafting with Kathy. Today we're doing another one in our series featuring Eclectic Images stamps and the Versamagic Chalk inks. So the Versamagic Chalk inks are a archival pigment ink. They can go onto multiple surfaces, so they can be used on gloss card, smooth card, textured card. They dry to a waterproof finish. They're also embossable, and you can also use them on things like fabric and wood and other sort of surfaces. So they're a multi-surface ink pad and they're archival and they're beautiful soft colours. I'm going to be testing myself a little bit with this one with some colours that I don't normally use, so that's going to be a bit of fun. The stamps we're working with is the Eclectic Images Quilt Elements with Bunny Quilt added in there as well. Now the Quilt Elements is made up of various pieces that you can use together to make a quilt. I always joke that this is, as I'm not a sewer, this is my form of doing quilting. So I'm going to today use the larger square and the larger triangle and some of the decorative elements as well as the bunny. Now I'm going to be using the square and inking just some of the edges of it to start with. I'm using the square rather than the line because if I stamped it with the outline square, I'd get a definite line. If I stamp it with the block here, I can get a much softer shaded effect. However, I have just re-inked my Versamagic chalk pads. There is re-inkers available for all the colours. Oh, I should have said the colours we're using. We're going to go with Thatched Straw, Gingerbread, and Mango Madness. Now, this is going to be fun. So yes, I have just re-inked my pads, so they're actually inking up a bit more enthusiastically than normal. So what I'm going to do, I'm just inking 3 edges of the stamp. And because I want the centre to be very soft, I'm actually going to stamp it off on my scrap first and then stamp it on the card. Normally it comes out a lot softer than that. I don't know whether Matthew can get a close up there. You can actually see a crisper edge. Normally we get that a lot softer, but as I said, I've just re-inked the pad. So it's a little more enthusiastic than usual. The other way that we could do this, if I ink it up a little bit more, stamp it off on the scrap and then use a brush just to soften out some of those edges. And I've got a little bit around there that I don't want, so I'm actually just going to use my own hand just to take those bits off and then use the brush just to soften those corners a bit. And then we'll stamp it in and see what we get. Make sure I turn it around the right way, that would be awful. Okay, that's the lovely soft look I'm really looking for. So we've got a little bit of an edge, but we've got that lovely muted area. So I'm going to re-stamp this one and get a little bit more softness happening there as well. So let's just ink our edges up. Grab our brush, stamp off on our scrap. Grab our brush. So it really depends with your own, whether they're new ink pads or just re-inked, or whether they're ones you've been using for a while, how well this effect works. So that's just added a little bit of softness in there. Bear with me, will get better as we go along. Okay, I'm going to stamp our little bunny in so we can make sure that he fits before we keep going any further. So we want him to be in that centre area. Never, with these chalk pads, never press them onto your stamp. You'll just end up with loads of ink everywhere that you don't need. Waste your ink, it gets ink all over the backing area of the stamp. So just just tap your stamp lightly on it, or take your ink pad to your stamp, but just tap lightly. Don't ever push, whichever way you're inking, don't push it, just little taps. Now let's line him up in here. Just looking that I've got him fairly centered in the rectangle. Okay, so there we've got our little bunny surrounded by our first parts of our quilt set. Now let's keep going with the lighter colours. So I'll pop the gingerbread away for the moment. And we'll get out our Mango Madness. I'm going to go. So inking up the square, and this time inking the whole stamp. One above. I'll put this more in shot, sorry. One below. So to get a good image, it's good if you actually stamp a little bit over the edge of the previous one. Is better than getting a white gap. But you can also, by the time we've added other colours in and stuff, if there is a bit of a white gap, you get away with it. But if you can just overlap a little bit, that will give you a better finished result. Now let's ink up with our very enthusiastic thatched straw. Pop 2 side pieces in. And now I'm going to switch to the triangle shape stamp. So it's already loaded onto a block. And where we've got Mango Madness next to each other, we'll put the thatched straw in there. So that's that corner and the bottom corner. Clean that off, come back in with the mango. And fill in those last little corners. So we can fill this one in and bring it out to a square. So hopefully you can start to see where this one's going now. Little one in there, and we need a little bit more of the thatched straw just to get those 2 outer squares. So you can just see how this could work with so many different colour combinations. The chalk inks work really well together colour wise. You can actually look at them quite often in sets of 3s or 4s, and you'll find there'll be like in aqua, there's a light aqua, a medium and a deeper one. The same with your blues and your pinks. So that gives you, makes it easy for choosing what colours to put together. And they've got just such a good colour range. Now I'm going to switch to the little heart shape. And back to the Mango Madness. Now I'm going to be going over where we've already stamped with mango, but because of the nature of the chalk ink, it will actually come out a shade darker. Even though it's the same colour, it'll come out a shade darker than the previous image. So you still get the stamped image showing up. Let's put a few more of those in, I think. Got one in here, one up there. Now I'm going to change to one of our patterns that I've picked to use. So you've got 3 different patterned squares. If you're wanting to use these, if you've been stamping your basic quilt with the smaller size square, you'll notice that the patterned ones are a little bit larger. So you can always make just a mask, a reverse mask. So you mask around where your square is, and that way you can then stamp that pattern over the smaller size squares as well. Now let's switch from our mango to our gingerbread. And just tapping. And it really starts to take form now once you start getting those extra patterns happening. Now I'm just deciding whether I want to add in more patterns or leave it with a couple of them just without anything. I always have trouble leaving something and not adding bits to it, but I'm actually quite liking that as it is. I think I'll leave it. Okay, so now I'm just going to do a little bit of colouring on the bunny. So using our number 2 Filbert brush, I'm just going to pick up a little bit of ink off the ink pad, just on the very tip of the brush, tap it off on my scrap to make sure that I haven't got too much intensity of colour to start with. And now we're just going to work from the edge of the bunny and just shade in gently. I don't want to actually colour him in, I just want to soften him. So again, pick up a little bit of colour, take off the excess, and just work from the edge Gently shading them. Of course, you could watercolour them. As I said at the start, these inks do dry waterproof. So if I wanted to, I could actually use some of my other watercolour paints or some of my dye inks and actually watercolour in the little bunny, which should be gorgeous as well. But sometimes just a little bit of shading's enough. Let's go to the top of his head. Oh, no wonder we call him Bunny Cute. Isn't he gorgeous? Okay, now before I go any further, I'm just going to give that a quick dry with the heat gun. Doesn't need to be heat set, but I wanted it to dry before I move on to the next stage. Let's actually create a bit of a background card for it while we're giving that one time to dry fully. So on another piece of card, I'll use the same image and we're just going to use the gingerbread. Now of course you can use these ink pads directly onto the paper if you want to, but for this card I don't want anything quite that strong. I'm just going to randomly stamp this, keeping in mind that it's only the border that's going to show. Just to show different ways of using your stamps. Doesn't have to be always the whole image that you see. Now let's get our brush and pick up a bit of the gingerbread on the end of a brush. Now this is a number 10 size brush. I could be quite happily doing my edging with either the number 8 or the number 10. And we'll shade some colour in there. The chalk inks are fantastic for doing background shading, for doing stenciling. You just get the softness so easily with them. Now, if you're not comfortable with doing shading the way I am, you can just do circles and that will give you a lovely soft image as well. It just does take a little bit longer and I tend to get a bit impatient and just smudge it instead. We've been laughing that I need to do a glossary of Kathy terms like smudging and pouncing and smooshing and maybe. Okay, let's go back to our first card. I'm just going to give my hands a wipe so I haven't got any fingerprints. Now this is where if you're a little bit ragged on some of your edges, it doesn't matter because we're going to trim it back. So I'm going to pop it in my trimmer. And I'm actually not looking for making it parallel with the card as it already was cut. I'm looking for getting a nice edge along where I've stamped. Now I can butt the card up against this end lip and get it nice and square. And you'll see like magic, I know this is cheating, but like magic, suddenly it looks like we've stamped our squares superbly evenly. Look, how wonderful is that? So as I said, don't get too stressed over getting all your squares that evenly because if you trim it back after, suddenly it all works. Now let's get our gingerbread and give a little smear around the edge of this card as well. I'm not going as heavy on this one as I did on the base card. Just want a little bit of a darker edge there. Now let's have a look at the two layered together. Excellent. I think actually we could have a bit more darker edge on our top card. So let's give it a bit of a swipe. Let me just brush a bit of dust off there. So grabbing my gingerbread pad, I'm going to lift the card up. I'm not going to go straight across. I'm going to go on an angle so we don't end up doing any damaging to the pad. And this is going to give us a deeper edge. Deeper coloured edge. to make it stand out that little much better. Anyway, there we go. Now let's go to some double-sided tape. Again, I'm just going to go over with the heat gun just to make sure it's dry, because I've got those pads so juicy. I just want to make sure that's dry so I don't smudge it with my fingers as I'm doing the next bits. Okay, let's pop our double-sided tape on. Let's get the work pad out of the way so it's not showing up so multicoloured. Okay, and I'm going to use my little acrylic block to help me pull that tape off right at the edge there. So I'm using the block to push the tape down and then just tear it off by pulling back against it. And now I'll grab my knife just to pick up the edges of those bits of tape. I've got a little bit over the edge there, so I'm just going to fold that back onto itself so I don't end up with a sticky bit hanging out the edge. Make sure it's really stuck before you start trying to lift it up. Last bit. Okay, so let's centre that on our card. So I'm just, before I stick it down with the tape, I'm just going to have a look at how much border I need top and bottom, how much border I need at the sides to make it nice and even. And then press down. Now to finish this one off, I just want to add some liquid pearls to our bunny, just to make his little nose and his eyes stand out a bit more. So this one I'm using is raspberry, and the blue that I'll use for his eyes is the royal blue. So let's just pop a little bit of that, just hold it away from your card as you start to squeeze so that you don't get any bubbles. A little bit there. Again, if we were watercolouring, we'd probably just paint these bits in whatever colour we want the eyes and the nose to be. But I felt that with everything else being very soft, to have these bits standing out would look good. Just give my blue a little bit of... That's very cheeky of it because it worked for me 5 minutes ago. Let's just give it another squeeze on our notepad and give it a bit of encouragement. I can also grab a pin, pop it in the end there. That's better. Okay, back to our card. Now, a way to stop that pearls drying out, the squeeze that I've got on the bottle now, if I hold that as I put the lid on, it means it's not sucking air back down the nozzle, which dries the glue, and that's what creates your blockages. So although your bottle doesn't look as pretty, that'll stop that blocking up and drying out between now and the next time I want to use it. So let's have a look at our little bunny card. And you can see how lovely this, particularly the hearts are, just over the top of the card. Let me just lift that up a little bit more. And how interesting it is using the same stamp for your background. It looks quite almost like a more grungy background stamp done that way, compared with being a crisp image there. So again, you've got 3 different, we've used this one. So there's the 3 different ones. You could use all of them on one card, or just like I've done here, just feature one. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed watching that. These inks are just beautiful to work with. As I said, they can go on lots of different surfaces, lots of different card types. And as I did say also with the bunny, if we'd stamped him with the gingerbread as we did, let it dry, we could have then watercoloured over the top of it. And there'll be some other clips that I'll be doing later where we'll be using this to our advantage, the fact that these dry waterproof, so you can then watercolour over the top and your base work's not going to move. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. We'll be back soon with another clip featuring these great inks, and we'll hope to see you then. Okay, bye.